Hi, scholars. We're on our last final chapter of Charlotte's Web. And I'm going to go over character perspective one more time before we move over from this unit. Character perspective is what a character thinks or believes to be true about another character, about the conflict, or a moment in the text. You should already know when you're looking for evidence, you need to ask yourself, what does the character do? What does the character say? And how does the character feel? Today, we're going to read our final chapter of Charlotte's Web, and you're going to answer the question, which chapter did you enjoy the most and why? You're going to record yourself talking about what happened in that chapter, the characters, and the specific event that happened in your favorite chapter of Charlotte's Web. So let's go ahead and get started. Open your PDF to chapter 22, A Warm Wind. And remember, you're going to be thinking about which chapter was your favorite so you can answer it in your seesaw activity. And so Wilbur came home to his beloved manure pile in the barn cellar. His was a strange homecoming. Around his neck, he wore a medal of honor. In his mouth, he held a sack of spider eggs. There is no place like home, Wilbur thought, as he placed Charlotte's 514 unborn children carefully in the safe in the corner. The barn smelled good. His friends, the sheep, and the geese were glad to see him back. These geese gave him a noisy welcome. Congratulations, they cried. Nice work. Mr. Zuckerman took the medal from Wilbur's neck and hung it on a nail over the pig pen, where visitors could examine it. Wilbur himself could look at it whenever he wanted to. In the days that followed, he was very happy. He grew to great size. He no longer wanted to worry about being killed, for he knew that Mr. Zuckerman would keep him as long as he lived. Wilbur thought often of Charlotte. A few strands of her old whelp still hung in the doorway. We all know now Charlotte has passed. I know, I'm sad too. Every day, Wilbur would stand and look at the torn, empty web, and a lump would come to his throat. No one had ever had such a friend, so affectionate, so loyal, and so skillful. The autumn days grew shorter. Lurvy brought the squashes and pumpkins to the garden and piled them on the barn floor, where they wouldn't get nipped on frosty nights. The maples and birches turned bright colors, and the wind shook them until they dropped their leaves one by one to the ground. Under the wild apple trees in the pasture, the little red apples lay thick on the ground. And the sheep gnawed on them, and the geese gnawed them, and the foxes came at night and sniffed them. One evening, just before Christmas, snow began falling. It covered the house, barn, and fields and woods. Wilbur had never seen snow before. When morning came, he went out and plowed the drifts in his yards, just for the fun of it. Fern and Avery arrived, dragging a sled. They coasted down a lane and out into the frozen pond in the pasture. Coasting is the most fun there is, said Avery. The most fun there is, retorted Fern, is when the Ferris wheels stop and Harry and I are at the top car and Henry makes the car swing and we can see everything from miles and miles. Goodness, you're still thinking about that old Ferris wheel, said Avery in disgust. The Ferris was weeks ago. I think about it all the time, said Fern, picking snow from her car. After Christmas, the thermometer dropped to 10 below zero. Cold settled on the world. The pasture was bleak and frozen. The cows stayed in the barn all the time now, except on sunny mornings when they went out and stood in the barnyard in the lee of the straw pile. The sheep stayed near the barn, too. For protection, they were thirsty. They ate snow. The geese hung around the barnyard the way the boys hang around the drugstore, and Mr. Zuckerman fed them corn and turnips to keep them cheerful. Many thanks, they always said when they saw food coming. Templeton moved indoors when winter came. His ratty home under the pig trough was too chilly, so he fixed himself a cozy nest in the barn behind the grain bins. He lined it with bits of dirty newspaper and rags, and whatever he found a trinket or a keepsake, he carried it home and stored it there. He continued to visit Wilbur 3 times a day. exactly at mealtime. And Wilbur kept the promise he had made. Wilbur let the rat eat first. Then, when Templeton couldn't hold another mouthful, then Wilbur would eat. As a result of overeating, Templeton grew bigger and fatter than any rat they ever saw. He was gigantic. He was as big as a young woodchuck. The old sheep spoke to him about his size one day. "You would live longer," said the sheep, "if you are less." And here is the rat and how big he's gotten from eating all the food. "Who wants to live forever?" said the rat. "I'm naturally a heavy eater, and I get untold satisfaction from pleasures of the feast." He patted his stomach, grinned at the sheep, and crept upstairs to lie down. All winter, Wilbur watched over Charlotte's egg sac as though we were guarding our own children. He scooped out a special place in the manure for the sack next to the board fence. On very cold nights, he lay so that his breath would warm it. For Wilbur, nothing in his life was more important than this small round object. Nothing else mattered. Patiently, he awaited at the end of winter and the coming of the little spiders. Life is always a rich and steady time when you're waiting for something to happen and or to hatch. The winter ended at last. "I heard the frogs today," said the sheep one evening. "Listen, you can hear them now." Wilbur stood and cocked his ears. From the pond in shrill chorus came the voices of hundreds of little frogs. "Springtime," said the old sheep thoughtfully, "and another spring." As she walked by, Wilbur saw a new lamb following her. She was only a few hours old. The snows melted away. The streams and ditches bubbled and shattered in rushing water. A sparrow with a streaky breast arrived and sang. The light straightened, the mornings came sooner. Almost every morning there was another new lamb in the sheepfold. The goose was sitting on 9 eggs, and the sky seemed wider and a warm wind blew. The last remaining strands of Charlotte's web floated away and vanished. One fine sunny morning after breakfast, Wilbur stood watching his precious sack. He wasn't thinking of anything much. As he stood there, he noticed something move. He stepped closer and stared. A tiny spider crawled from the sack. It was no bigger than a grain of sand, no bigger than a head of a pin. Its body was gray with a black stripe underneath. Its legs were gray and tan. It looked just like Charlotte. Wilbur trembled all over when he saw it. The little spider waved at him. Then Wilbur looked more closely. 2 more little spiders crawled out and waved. Then they climbed around the sack, exploring their new world. Then 3 more spiders, then 8, then 10. Charlotte's children were here at last. Wilbur's heart pounded. He began to squeal. Then he raced in circles, kicking manure in the air. Then he turned in a backflip. And he planted his front feet and came out in front of Charlotte's children. "Hello there," he said. The first spider said hello, but his voice was so small Wilbur couldn't hear it. "I am an old friend of your mother," said Wilbur. "I'm so glad to see you. Are you all right? Is everything all right?" The little spiders waved their forelegs at him, and Wilbur could only see by the way they acted they were glad to see him. "Is there anything I can get you? Is there anything you need?" The youngest spiders just waved. For several days and several nights they crawled here and there, up and down, about and around, waving at Wilbur, trailing tiny drag lines behind them and exploring their home. There were dozens and dozens of them. Wilbur couldn't count them, but he knew that they had a great many new friends. They grew quite rapidly. Soon, one was as big as a BB shot. They made tiny webs near their sack. Then came a quiet morning when Mr. Zuckerman opened the door on the north side. A warm draft of rising air blew softly through the barn cellar. The air smelled like a damp earth of spruce woods and sweet springtime. The baby spiders felt warm and updraft. One spider climbed on top of the fence. Then it did something that came to a great surprise to Wilbur. The spider stood on its head, pointed its spinnerets in the air, and let loose a cloud of fine silk. The silk formed into a balloon, and Wilbur watched the spider let go of the fence and rose into the air. "Goodbye," it said as it sailed through the doorway. "Wait a minute," screamed Wilbur. "Where do you think you're going?" Remember Charlotte when she was telling Wilbur that some of her cousins could make balloons and fly away like the balloon is flying away as well. And now her babies can do that as well. Wait a minute, screamed Wilbur. Where do you think you're going? But the spider was already out of sight. Then another baby spider crawled to the top of the fence and stood on his head and made a balloon and sailed away. Then another spider, then another, and soon the air was filled with many balloons, each balloon carrying a spider, just like on this page. They're going up into the air. Tiny balloons. Wilbur was frantic. Charlotte's babies were disappearing at a great rate. Come back, children, he cried. Goodbye, they called. Goodbye, goodbye. At last, one little spider took time enough to stop and talk to Wilbur before making his balloon. We're leaving here on the warm updraft. This is our moment for setting north. We are aeronauts, and we're going into the world to make webs for ourselves. But where, said Wilbur. Wherever the wind takes us. High, low, near, far, east, west, north, south. We take to the breeze, and we go as we please. Are all of you going? Asked Wilbur. You can't all go. I will be left alone with no friends. Your mother wouldn't want that to happen, I'm sure. The air was now full of balloonists, and the barn cellar looked almost though as a mist gathered. Balloons by the dozen were rising, circling, and drifting away through the door, sailing off on gentle wind. The cries of goodbye, goodbye, goodbye came weakly to Wilbur's ears. He couldn't bear to watch it anymore. In sorrow, he sank to the ground and closed his eyes. This seemed like the end of the world, to be deserted by Charlotte's children. Wilbur cried himself to sleep. When he woke up, it was late afternoon. He looked at the egg sack. It was empty. He looked into the air. The balloonists were gone. Then he walked drearily into the doorway where Charlotte's Webb used to be. He was standing there, thinking of her, when he heard a small voice. Salutations, it said. I'm up here. So am I, said another tiny voice. So am I, said a third voice. 3 of us are staying. We like this place, and we like you. Wilbur looked up at the top of the doorway. 3 small webs were being constructed. On each web, working busily, was one of Charlotte's daughters. Can I take this? Can I take this to mean, said Wilbur, that you have definitely decided to live here in the barn cellar, and I'm going to have 3 friends? Yes, indeed, said the spiders. What are your names, please? Asked Wilbur, trembling with joy. I'll tell you my name first, replied the first spider. If you tell me why you're trembling. Trembling with joy, said Wilbur. My name is Joy, said the first spider. What's my mother's middle initial? Asked the spider. A, said Wilbur. Then my name is Aranea, said the spider. How about me? Said the third spider. Will you just pick out a nice, sensible name for me? Something not too long, something not too fancy, and not too dumb. Wilbur thought hard. Nellie, he suggested. Fine, I like that very much, said the third spider. You may call me Nellie. She daintily fastened her orb line next to the to the next spoke of the web. Wilbur's heart brimmed with happiness. He felt that he should make a short speech on this very important occasion. Joy, Arnea, Nellie, he began. Welcome to the barn cellar. You have chosen a hollowed doorway from which to string your webs. I think it's only fair to tell you that I was devoted to your mother. I owe my very life to her. She was brilliant, beautiful, and loyal to the end. I shall always treasure her memory. To you, her daughters, I pledge my friendship forever and ever. I pledge mine, said Joy. I do too, said Arnea. And so do I, said Nellie, who had just managed to catch a small gnat. It was a happy day for Wilbur, and many more happy, tranquil days followed. As time went on and the months and years came and went, he was never without friends. Fern did not come regularly to the barn anymore. She was growing up and more careful to avoid childish things like sitting on a milk stool near a pig pen. But Charlotte's children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, year after year, always lived in the doorway. Each spring, there were new little spiders hatching out to take place of the old. Most of them sailed away on their balloons, but always 2 or 3 stayed to set up housekeeping in the doorway. So now I'm noticing every time Charlotte left her babies, and then they left, and then some of them stayed. Then they had babies, and then some of those babies left, and then some of those stayed. So Wilbur always had some spider friends at the top of his doorway. Mr. Zuckerman took fine care of Wilbur all the rest of his days, and the pig was often visited by friends and admirers. For nobody ever forgot the year of his triumph and miracle Webb. Life in the barn was very good. Night and day, winter and summer, spring and fall, dull days and bright days. And it was the best place to be, thought Wilbur. This warm, delicious cellar with garrulous geese. The changing seasons, the heat of the sun, the passage of swallows, the nearest of rats, the sameness of sheep, the love of spiders, and the smell of manure, and the glory of everything. Wilbur never forgot about Charlotte. Although he loved her children and grandchildren dearly, none of the new spiders ever took her place in his heart. She was in a class by herself. It's not often that someone comes along who is a true friend and a good writer. Charlotte were both. The end. Scholars, this was a really, really good book, Charlotte's Web. This was also Miss McKinney's first time reading this book as well, and I really enjoyed it. So now, as a part of your activity, you're going to turn and find your favorite chapter. Tell me about that chapter. Tell me about the characters and the conflict. I can't wait to see your work. So glad I got to read Charlotte's Web with you all.